welcome everyone to this great roundtable discussion on loss and damage to address loss and damage with compensation and liability approach within the paradigm shift. Colleagues, I'm a climate change negotiator with least developing countries, particularly I'm following the loss and damage. So we all know that compensation and liability is a very sensitive issue for the developed country parties. However, the developing country parties, we would like to see compensation and liability approach to address loss and damage. Our challenge is that we accepted exclusion clause for Article 8 of the Paris Agreement. Also here at COP27, we got some sort of critical legal implication on read out the agenda item 8F of the COP and CMA that stated that this agenda item 8F does not involve liability and compensation issues. So still we are exploring the legal implication of this read out. So with that said, I would like to welcome you all to this great session, and we are very lucky that we also got a very good panel, Professor Ian Fry, Professor Cesar, Runa Khan, and Advocate Mark and Advocate Aisha. With that said, I would like to hand over to my co-chair. Colleagues, I'm here at the negotiation process. I need to run to negotiation session now, and I do apologize. If you all allow me, I would like to only hear, and I would like request Dr. Amdadul Hoque to chair this session. Thanks.
Thank you, Advocate Hafiz. Once again, welcoming you all today's session on the eve of climate law and governance day 2022, and we are passing through the COP27, and happy to have you all here for this morning. Again, good morning, good afternoon, evening across the world. Many friends, fellows are joining today, and on the topic of implementing climate commitments through policy, law, and practices. We have a brilliant panelist, keynote speaker, chair here today, and I will not waste time actually. And before that, I will once again introduce you all our great participants, great panelists, our chair, and at the same time the keynote speakers. So today's topic is a roundtable. Today's roundtable is on addressing loss and damage liability and compensation within development paradigm. And you all know Professor Ian Fry, who is the Rapporteur on Human Rights and Climate Change, United Nations, will present the keynote speech. And if I tell you, hello Ian, it's great to see you again. And you know, Ian is a very known in the area of law and policy expertise. He is international environment law and policy expert. His focus is primarily on the mitigation policies associated with the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Paris Agreement, and related instruments. He is the ambassador for climate change and environment for the government of Tuvalu, and he has worked for Tuvalu government for the last 21 years. Dr. Fry has represented the Tuvalu government in numerous international fora, including the World Summit on Sustainable Development, Commission for Sustainable Development, UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and the Kyoto Protocol, Convention on Biodiversity, United Nations General Assembly, and UNSCCC conferences. Dr. Fry coordinates the least developed countries on matters relating to carbon markets and is currently on the Bureau of the UNFCCC. He has held the position of Vice Chair of the Facilitative Branch of the Compliance Committee under the Kyoto Protocol and has co-chaired the Durban Forum on Capacity Building. I can continue for 30 minutes for Dr. Ian Fry, and I would welcome him, please, to present his keynote speech. Dr. Ian Fry, great to see you again.
Thank you very much, and I'm currently at the COP itself, and it's a great honor and pleasure to be here. Thank you for the introduction. I am now a special rapporteur for human rights and climate change, so I'm no longer directly involved in the negotiation process, but trying to keep a close look to it. I thought I'd give a bit of historical context between to this issue of liability and compensation to open up the discussion. When we were negotiating Article 8 under the Paris Agreement, the United States was very strongly opposed to including loss and damage as a separate agenda item under the Paris Agreement. And in fact, they sort of applied a three-pronged approach to stopping loss and damage included in the Paris Agreement. First was that it was a total denial issue, that they did not want to see any reference to loss and damage in the Paris Agreement. But through the hard work of the G77, we managed to develop a common position on loss and damage that we presented as the G77. And so this was very difficult, particularly for the French delegation, to ignore a position of the G77. So the US then tried to sort of confuse the issue by bringing it in on board to the section on adaptation as a way of sort of suggesting this is just risk assessment work. And the final and that didn't fly. And so the final approach was to sort of, if they were going to accept to an Article 8 of the Paris Agreement, they needed some sort of exclusion clause on liability and compensation. So the Prime Minister Tuvalu met twice in the last few nights of Paris with Senator Kerry on this issue, and they basically came to an agreement that there would be some exclusion clause. But the thing that the Prime Minister of Tuvalu negotiated was that it would be in the COP decision rather than the actual agreement itself. We were quite worried that any sort of exclusion to loss and damage would be part of the Paris Agreement, which gives it a much more legal strength. So they presented us with 2 sentences to work on, and we narrowed that down to 1 sentence, which basically says agrees that Article 8 of the agreement does not involve or provide a basis for any liability or compensation. That was the best we could get out of this agreement. Apologies for the noise, the airplane noise. It's very hard to find a quiet spot here. I tried to get into this building behind me, but President Biden is speaking and they're excluding people from getting in there. So I have to sit outside here and deal with the airplanes.
We completely understand. I know it is.
We are not getting much sound, don't worry.
Okay, thank you. So that was the deal, and we narrowed it down to 1 sentence. And if you look carefully at that sentence, it agrees that Article 8 of the agreement does not provide or involve or provide a basis for any liability or compensation. So by inference, any other article of the Paris Agreement does provide a basis for liability and compensation. So that's how we read that 1 sentence. And of course, it's a COP decision, and we have to consider, how binding a COP decision is in international law. There are 2 issues around this, is issue of liability and compensation. And of course, the United States are quite concerned about the liability issue because of, they see an avalanche of litigation against them. The issue of compensation is quite different, and we're quite concerned that this has sort of been pulled into the concept itself. Effectively, loss and damage is compensation. We have to provide compensation to the countries that have been affected by the impacts of climate change. And we only have to look at the recent situations in Pakistan, Nigeria, the droughts in Somalia. It's the huge costs of damage as a consequence of these climate change events. And certainly we will be striving to explore means of reaching compensation, whether we use that term or we use other terms, associated with that, that we can use restitution or a lot of other terms that don't directly, trigger this issue of compensation. So we still think there is a strong argument to deal with this. Of course, the COP established the Warsaw International Mechanism well ahead of Paris Agreement, and so there's work on loss and damage well before this sort of caveat was presented. So there are other opportunities there. And there are other avenues for taking on board this issue of liability and compensation, or at least addressing the issue of compensation. And we have seen a recent case in the Human Rights Committee where Torres Strait Islanders, Indigenous peoples of Northern Australia, took a case to the Human Rights Committee, and the committee found in favour of these Torres Strait Islanders that their land was being affected by climate change, and that the Australian government had not done enough, and that the government had to compensate this community for the actions of not protecting them enough. So we're starting to develop, a law around this issue of compensation. Of course, there are other mechanisms that we can draw upon to bring forward this issue of dealing with loss and damage, and mechanisms of dispute. And the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea is an option. There are dispute resolution mechanisms within the Climate Convention and the Paris Agreement, which have never been tested so far, and they provide opportunities for legal considerations in this issue. Of course, there are opportunities for tort cases against companies or whatever, for nuisance or damage, as another way of bringing forward these issues. So in the issue of dealing with liability and compensation, or particularly compensation and loss and damage, there are still many avenues to apply, and we still haven't tested the issue of this Article 51 of the COP decision as to whether it has legal ability to restrain actions on liability and compensation. So that's just a sort of brief overview of the issue, and hopefully that provides a basis for this discussion. And thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Truly, we are all struggling and fighting to find out, to develop and to build a mechanism for loss and damage to address. And definitely the government, international community need to be more responsive, to be aligned with the compensation, and at the same time, the challenges facing people due to unpredictable and uncertainty and impacting by the loss and damage. And I'm sorry, you will find so many Kazi and Amdadul Hoque, because I shared my link so that you will find so many Kazi here. So don't be confused. This is me.
Do you think, Amdad, maybe we could ask the people to change their name, like Mr. Mark Bishler is there.
I'm not
and maybe
sure
he can change
if the technical
that is
people
possible.
here, if you can help. I think that should be. Welcome, Mark Bishler, and happy to have you. And and truly,
I think he can change his name on if he just goes to the changing the names.
Right, we are around 5-6 speakers today, and have 45 minutes in hand. At the same time, we'll keep some times for question answer. And let's, if we 5, 7, 8 minutes, if you can share, that would be great. And then if we find, if we sometimes remain, then we'll again share with us. Let's start with Dr. Kirit Shelat. He is the ex-chairman of National Council of Sustainable Development India, and is a long experiences on the climate justice and Indian perspective and global perspective. And I would request to start with Mr. Shelat, please. You need to unmute yourself. Okay, maybe he yet to. Okay, if not, okay, then let's.
Can you hear me?
Okay,
Dr. Kazi?
now, yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, good morning, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak, and that virtually from Ahmedabad, India. As I wrote to Dr. Kazi, I was to arrive there on last Sunday, but in a place where we were to stay, and government did not allow, so I canceled my reservation. But this is a very good opportunity, and on a very important issue relates to entire climate change. First of all, as very clearly mentioned, that global warming is an international phenomenon, but its impact, adverse impact is at village level, local level, and some adverse impact and people are holding land. So, international community has not paid any attention how to take care of farmers and such lands. This is one part. But very briefly, I will deal how we deal in India with impact of the climate change and adversities as a national policy, because one thing is what international community does, but national government has responsibility to farmers and to the people who are affected by adverse impact of cyclone or drought. So in India, very briefly, we have a clear disaster reconstruction policy. Whenever any calamity takes place, government provides relief to householder or a landholder in terms of cash and in terms of kind. So it takes care of his immediate needs. It provides subsidized loan for buying new assets, so that his livelihood starts again. This is one. Second is, before the calamity occurs, now we have a weather-related services. So information is given in advance about likelihood of a cyclone or likelihood of a delayed rain and what farmers should do. So in case of farmers, it is weather advisory followed by agro advisory. Third part is that when a calamity takes place, livelihood is affected and restoration takes place. So there is an employment guarantee scheme. So anybody who gets disturbed in his employment, government provides employment in the community projects. So his livelihood is sustained. Fourth, there is a safety net of crop and cattle insurance, in which also government supports farmers and landholders. And finally, government provides food security. The food is made available to the local people at a standard rate. In the current pandemic, it was provided free to the poor families, and that was related to pandemic, but it is also related in time of calamities. Now, coming to international situation, I do agree that there are no legal in the different agreements which can do this. But at least the international organizations can do certain important decisions and help countries which are affected. First and foremost is that World Meteorological Organization, which has made some announcement, should make available advisory to the country. It is not necessary that it should be provided to India. We have, but there are large number of countries in the world which do not have any satellite support and have no advisory. So they need from their resources, whether advisory, they don't need this advisory, and FAO should provide agro advisory, because this country do not have even agriculture experts. In India, we have agriculture experts, probably maximum number of scientists in any country has. But in very many countries, there are 10, 20, 30 scientists. In some countries, there are 1,000. In India, if we compare, in Gujarat, we have 2,000 agriculture scientists. So that situation differs, but FAO is an organization which is an international organization which is supposed to support, need to provide agro advisory, followed by weather advisory. So before damage takes place or after damage takes place, this advisory is to be given. If damage has taken place, what should be done? If damage is about to take place, what should be done? This is number one. Number two, there are very important fund called Green Climate Fund. Now, they can earmark resources. Have they earmarked resources in which agriculture and farmer could be prioritized? These funds should be given for agriculture, restoration of the land, because due to cyclones, thousands and thousands of hectares of land are washed away. And due to drought, thousands and thousands of hectares of land are eroded. So whether Green Climate Fund, which is an international body, which is connected with UNFCCC, can it be requested, okay, please, all right, you have so much billion, please earmark for agriculture and farmers X amount of resources, X percentage of resources, and also identify on so much basis which are countries which need it. Third, I will complete because I think there is limited time. There is another organization which relates to technology transfer. In agriculture sector, the technology is available in the world in very many countries where in difficult situation, difficult weather conditions of extreme heat or extreme cold, crops have been identified which can grow. With saline water, there are crops which can grow. In sea, for example, seaweed can grow. So technology, expertise, experience is available. So that should be made available from those who have it to those who need it. And an exchange bank can be set up in which this can be handled on a regular basis. So these are three suggestions to the international organization, and that doesn't have any constraint from any agreement and which can be implemented easily. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Shailat. And truly, you discovered a new dimension and the global audience. And there are many stakeholders across the world, the global stakeholders, international agencies, government, and definitely we can't wait for others, whatever the resources and new intervention this moment in place, we need to reform those framework and the decision-making process so that, and you already referred some great examples, how we can take forward the options, to save life and livelihood. And now let's, I will take you to Bangladesh for very practical experiences, friendship doing. Barrister Aisha Tassin Khan is the Senior Director and Head of Inclusive Citizenship of Friendship. She is a barrister, and before joining Friendship, she has worked in reported chambers and legal firms. She has authored and compiled legal manuals which help Friendship paralegal execute their journey for providing justice to neglected communities in Bangladesh. Some of her syllabus and curricula are now being used by the government of Bangladesh by their request in their school in some areas. She will share with you her very practical experiences, those who are truly facing struggle with the loss and damage. Barrister Aisha Tassin Khan, please.
Thank you very much. Greetings from Bangladesh. I'd like to start with a very short video, if that's permitted. Kazi.
I know okay.
Situated in the heart of the river islands, the streams look like snakes crisscrossing the landscape from above. One of the world's largest rivers, the Jamuna gives rise to sedimentary deltas called chors and also erodes them on a regular basis. Chors in the Jamuna survive roughly 3 years before succumbing to erosion. The lives of chor residents are subject to frequent formation and destruction of these islands, both along the Jamuna River as well as the Brahmaputra, Dhorola, Dudhkumar, and Tista. Most chors in the north are under the jurisdiction of Gaibandha and Kurigram districts, though aside from being citizens of Bangladesh, the residents of more than 300 chors are deprived of their basic rights and have no access to the essential infrastructure, goods, and services due to the isolation and impermanence of these islands.
বা তাদের ময়মুরব্বি যারা আছে তাদের কাছে দেখছি 11 থেকে 12 বছর বয়স হলে ছেলে মেয়ে বিয়ে করে।
Despite there being government schools and healthcare facilities, health workers, teachers, and other authorities are often unable to perform their duties due to the difficult commute. Detached from the mainland, Illiteracy, child marriage, dowry, and other social anomalies are rampant.
বড় হলে যেটুক যৌতুক নাগে ছোট হলে আরো কম নাগে এইজন্য তাড়াতাড়ি বিয়ে দেয়
আমরা এলাকার লোক যা মিথ্যা কথা বলি যে আমার মেয়ের বয়স 18 হয়েছে বা 20 হয়েছে আমাকে একটা জন্ম নিবন্ধন দাও তখন চেয়ারম্যান বিশ্বাস করে দিয়ে দেয়
However, Chor residents are now eager to get rid of such social anomalies.
সুশাসন যদি থাকে তখন হয় কি the cycle of poverty তখন চলে যায় কারণ স্টেক হোল্ডার্স ডিউটি বেয়ারার্স ওদের এঙ্গেজমেন্টটা আরো অনেক বেড়ে যায় আর একটা এম্পাওয়ারমেন্টের জন্য সুশাসন ইজ ভেরি ইম্পর্টেন্ট আমাদের গভর্নমেন্ট পয়সা নিয়ে বসে আছে লিগ্যাল এডের জন্য কেউ কিন্তু জানে না এটা অ্যাবসলিউটলি বিশ্বের জন্য এটা রোল মডেল হতে পারে কারণ আমরা হাতে হাতে এটার ইম্প্যাক্টটা পাচ্ছি
চরের কতগুলো স্পেশাল ফিনোমেনা আছে যেটা স্ট্রিক্টলি রিলেটেড টু দ্য চর মেইনল্যান্ডে এই ফিনোমেনাগুলো আমরা দেখতে পাই না ওরা যে মার্জিনালাইজড হয়ে যেসব ব্যাপারে চ্যালেঞ্জেসগুলো ফেস করে তো মেইনল্যান্ডের লোকরা কিন্তু ফেস করে না ফিল দ্যাট যে চরের কাজগুলা একটু টেলর মেড করে কাজ করতে হবে আমাদের আর যেহেতু ইটস টেলর মেড আমাদের স্পেশালিস্ট ইন উই হ্যাভ টু কাম আপ উইথ ইনোভেটিভ আইডিয়াস ফর এক্সাম্পল ওরা যদি আমাদের কাছে না আসতে পারে আমাদের ওদের কাছে যেতে হবে
Great. Mr. Aisha Tasin Khan, if you can
Go
briefly,
to my very
okay,
briefly. I've always started by saying that social injustice is one of the cruel outcomes of climate change. The question being asked is how vulnerable communities can be reconnected for the potential of full rights and entitlements. Climate damage and change threatens the effective enjoyment of the most basic human rights like food, safety, housing, security, etc. Slowly, climate change therefore slowly or in an hour takes away all that from a human being. Those basic rights are just gone. Breaches of those rights makes humanity answerable. To those affected by the condition, therefore, a very pertinent question arises is, where is justice? It's therefore imperative that all policies and governance tools be rights-based so that human rights are not swept away with the floods and cyclones. Improving access to justice is increasingly recognized as an important means to tackle inequality and improve inclusive growth. States and international communities must ensure that rights holders have recourse to justice, whereby ensuring appropriate adaptation and mitigation measures to protect them. All states must build adaptive practices and capabilities where justice opportunities are available and swift. This can be done by sensitizing government officials, primarily those in the front line, by locally led adaptation practices, working with NGOs and various development bodies, allows us to enable justice practice in every step. Services should be delivered to their doorstep by adaptive measures. Access to all government safety net should be ensured by keeping in mind the above practice method and further developing informal justice systems like negotiations, discussions, ADR, etc. These can be done by training local government officers, elders, and the community. I'm just going to go quickly to adaptation as we have
maybe in a minute, please.
In a minute. Adaptation must be more proactive than reactive. I reiterate that adaptation policies at all levels must have and include justice concerns. It is not the basic requirement. Is it not the basic requirement for recovery? It is like the two sides of a coin. This will bring back balance between human rights and justice, in this case, climate justice. Adaptation and mitigation then looks a bit like reparation. But is this not what climate justice seekers seek?
Thank you. Thank you so much. The beautiful video, it's a documentary already explained us how you implementing great programs to reaching people those who are seems to be excluded. And now I will invite Professor Cesar Rodriguez Gatibu. All of you very aware about him. He is a leading legal scholar and thinker in human rights and has been a driving force in human rights litigation by young people, in which courts in several countries have ordered speedier action to reduce future climate change risk. He is the founding director of the Climate Litigation Accelerator within the Center for Human Rights and Global Justice at New York University Law. Earlier in his native Colombia, Rodriguez Gravito was co-founder and executive director of De Justicia, which remains Colombia's leading human rights law organization. He has numerous books, and I can refer some of those: The Global Expansion of the Rule of Law, Socioeconomic Rights, Justice, Political and Economics in Latin America. So that, there are many books you can have a look. And I would request now Professor Cesar Rodriguez Gativo, please.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me well. The connection here in my hotel in Sharm El Sheikh is patchy. But thank you for the invitation. I'm glad to be part of this distinguished panel. In the limited time that we have, I'm going to comment on the potential of climate litigation as a supplement to climate negotiations to advance loss and damage as a cause, and of course as a global purpose. These brief comments are based on a global study of human rights-based climate lawsuits that my program at NYU Law School has conducted for the last couple of years. It's now publicly available. The database is in the website CLX, as in Climate Litigation Accelerator, clxtoolkit.org. So I'm going to only extract a few lessons from that study that I think offer some ideas for climate litigation on or litigation on loss and damage going forward, given that now compensation and liability are off the table in negotiations. So there are over 200 lawsuits that have been filed before domestic and international, regional, judicial, and quasi-judicial bodies that seek to hold governments and to a lesser extent corporations accountable for insufficient action on mostly mitigation of climate change. 90% of those lawsuits, there are some very well-known lawsuits and court decisions like the Urgenda decision in the Netherlands, the Neubayer case in Germany, the decision of the Colombian Supreme Court in the case that I was fortunate to co-lead on behalf of 25 young plaintiffs. And we now know that that body of litigation has made very tangible contributions to international climate law and action. And I'll just highlight 3 lessons. One is the fact that through those lawsuits, litigants and courts have been able to domesticate, to bring down to earth at the domestic level, the lofty international promises that the governments make in venues like this one here in Sharm El Sheikh. So what courts have been doing, for example, more recently, the Brazilian Supreme Court just last week issued its second outstanding ruling holding the Bolsonaro government accountable for its lack of action against climate change. All of this based on human rights standards. So domesticating international standards. Second, a very promising collaboration with scientists, with the scientific community has been forged through amicus briefs, through interventions by prominent scientists who have provided the requisite scientific information for courts to be able to adjudicate on these complicated issues of, for example, climate attribution and how much a fair share contribution would be by any given country and government or corporation. And finally, speed and ambition. One thing that the climate litigation has provided and to the climate action field is nudging governments, and again, to a lesser extent, corporations. Only 10% of the cases based on rights-based arguments have been targeted, have targeted corporations. You know, famously, last year, the Dutch High Court ruled against Shell. It's on appeal that decision for lack of sufficient action against climate change in the business model. So speed and ambition, no, it's putting the foot on the right accelerator of climate action is something that climate litigants and courts have been able to do. Now, I'll end with some ideas on what this tells us, this body of knowledge, of expertise developed in the last few years, by the way. All of these have happened very quickly. In my study that's coming out in a book titled Litigating the Climate Emergency. It's out now for open access by Cambridge University Press. We show that this has changed very quickly. It's a relatively young field that's
Dr. Shilat, can you please mute yourself, Dr. Shilat? Please. Zoom moderator, you can help. Rana, you may help. Okay, go ahead, Professor Silas.
Okay, so I'll end with a few ideas on the lessons that this can offer us for this open-ended field, new field of loss and damage litigation and negotiation. So first thing that I want to say is that litigation does not necessarily get in the way of progress on negotiation. For a long time, there was kind of this mutual distrust or mistrust on the part of the litigation community on the one hand, and the negotiators on the other hand. There's promising, and even here, there is today a number of sessions that will bring together negotiators and litigators in the hopes and based on the belief that if litigation is carefully planned and crafted, if, for example, attention is given to remedies, what exactly is asked of governments or corporations, if also litigation is designed to provide nudges towards for governments and corporations to come through with their promises that they made in case of governments in places like COP, the case of corporations in the net zero promise plans and in their public statements on climate action, then there may be, and this is what's happened mostly in the rights-based climate litigation field at large, there may be a virtuous circle, a mutually beneficial effect on negotiation and between negotiation and litigation. Finally, one thing that I would just one last thought, of course, because this is a new field, there have some strategic decisions to be made about key issues that I won't have the time to elaborate on, but I'll just flag them. The choice of defendants, the choice of jurisdiction, and also the choice of remedies. There's so many potential answers or options in those three fronts that need to be carefully but also expeditiously considered by litigants and courts. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Cesar, and thank you so much. I'll not go for details, but quickly capture your point. We need to definitely bring together the mitigators and negotiator, and at the same time, great point you raised, the scientists and the legislators, and they need to be in one table to exchange knowledge, information, ideas to take our spirit forward. Now I'll go for Mark Elvenger. Is a lawyer and a member of Luxembourg Bar since 1985. He has held the office of chairman of the Young Bar Association of Luxembourg and member of the Bar Council. Mark has been active in the field of overseas cooperation with several NGOs since the early 1980s. In the context, he has been a member of the board and chairman of the platform Luxembourg NGOs and its representative on the NGDO Liaison Committee with the European Commission. He has also been a member of the board of the Foundation of Grand Duke Henry at Grand Duchess Maria Theresa. He is a member of the Investment Committee of Luxembourg Development and Microfinance Fund. In addition of being chairman of the Friendship Luxembourg, Mark Elvenger is also with Runa Khan, co-chair of the Friendship International. Mark Elvenger, please.
Thank you, Kazi. By far too much there. Even some things are no more totally the case. What I'm primarily, I think, for the purpose of this panel, I'm a lawyer in private practice, and since nearly 40 years. And I would say that probably 50% of the cases, and I'm a litigator, so 80% of my work is in litigation, and I would say 50% of those 80% are in some way related to matters of liability. And I think it's very nice for me to speak just after Professor Garavito, who has certainly much more knowledge about the subject. So I'm coming in a bit spontaneously here. And I think what if I've understood correctly, most of the cases which he is referring to and which have been brought to the courts in the last years and now more and more are about insufficient action of governments in order to reduce the negative impact of climate change, which has often to do with unheld promises. So that certain commitments have been made and then those commitments are not really implemented. And it's of course great, I think, to see that courts more and more indeed find that what governments commit at the international level should also result in actual action in reality, and that they would hold governments accountable for that. I would say maybe a bit about what I would nearly consider the other side of the coin, and which would be not so much just the question of insufficient action, but it would be really about the question of indemnification and liability, including for past action, not inaction, but action, which is, I think, at the heart of the whole loss and damage discussion. Of course, and this is not just backwards looking. It's not just about making governments and maybe also companies liable for the past actions and the loss which this past action causes now, but it's also about the fact that if governments would have to face liability, legal liability, and have to pay compensation for past action, that would obviously be the strongest accelerator to get them to take action in the future. And I think that's also what Professor Garavito has now said just about the virtuous cycle between negotiation and litigation. Because if governments had to face the fact that they will have to pay damages for the losses which are occurring today and have already occurred yesterday, they would of course be pressed for their own benefit to take the necessary action to reduce those losses for the future. And now I said it, I'm a litigator, and litigators have this characteristic of mindset that if they start thinking about the case, either they dismiss it immediately for saying there's no hope, so forget it, or they say, well, maybe there is something in there. And then the more they think, then the more it becomes obvious for them that they are right in their claim. And as I think about the question of civil liability of governments and possibly also companies, but also governance for the loss which the people, which Aisha has shown in her film, are suffering on a day-to-day basis due to the impact of climate change, then actually I have no idea of why they could not bring their cases before the courts, for example, of Luxembourg or of France or of the United States, at least in the civil liability system, which I know, which requires actually 3 elements in order for loss to be compensated. One is a fault. And I think at least now, today, and since some years, I think it can no more be challenged or contested that governments are at fault if they don't take the measures which are required to stop the impact of climate change. Maybe 20 years ago, there would have been an argument about that. I think that since a number of years, there can't be an argument anymore about the fact that it is a fault, that it's a faulty behavior not to take the necessary action. The second element which is required is about loss. I think nobody anymore dares even contest that there is loss on a daily basis. And the third element is causality, and I think there it's the same. Causality is no more denied by anybody. And then you have certain mechanisms in civil liability which make such action absolutely not unrealistic. Because, for example, if I would sue the people from the chores in Bangladesh, if one of them would sue the Luxembourg government would of course say, well, I'm not at all the only one who's liable. The United States are even more liable, and China is also liable, etc. But we, at least in our Luxembourg system of civil liability, have the understanding of what we call joint and several liability, which means that if some loss is caused by a number of different parties, each of these parties is liable for the entire loss, to compensate the entire loss, and he has then simply a right of recourse against those who are co-liable with him. So you don't have to sue all the countries. You can sue just one and require indemnification from that one, and then it's for that country to take recourse against others. There is, of course, there could be, and it has been mentioned, but which is the jurisdiction? There would be matters of immunity of jurisdiction and immunity of enforcement. Immunity of jurisdiction is not an issue. You can sue the Luxembourg government in Luxembourg. You can't sue it before French courts. You can't sue it before the Bangladeshi courts because it could prevail itself of immunity of jurisdiction. But it has no immunity of jurisdiction defense if you sue it before the Luxembourg courts. You have, of course, the issue of immunity of execution, but that's then another question. We'd have to see whether the Luxembourg government deny indemnification. So all this to say that I am actually of the view that it's high time to start for the small people in the chores to go and see their lawyer, first to the friendship paralegal, and for him then to relate him to maybe a lawyer in Luxembourg or in France or in the UK, and to start suing the governments and possibly also a certain number of companies.
Thank you
very much.
Mark Elvinger. Thank you so much. Would have been good, would have been great to listen more and more. We have only 15 minutes in hand. That's why I have to interpret. And now it's turn for a great speaker for today, so Mark Bischler. Mark Bischler is Ambassador, Permanent Representative of Luxembourg to the United Nations Office in Geneva for Human Rights. And you know, he is by training, he's a lawyer with a master's degree from University of Paris. And he has consecutively served as a Deputy Director for Development Cooperation and Humanitarian Actions, as a Deputy Permanent Representative of Luxembourg, and he has plenty, you know, I must say the background of, you know, the hues sparkling. Mark Bischler, please.
Thank you, Dr. Hoque. Do you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, very well, loud and clear.
Thank you. Thank you very much for including me in this discussion. And I'm very sorry for the unintentional temporary identity theft that appeared on the screen when I was joining the call, and I think I was able to fix it. I'm really happy to be with all of you, all eminent experts on the topic, much more than I am, and I recognize, of course, the Special Rapporteur Ian Fry, and of course also my very dear friends Runa Khan and Mark Elvinger. I will not start to go into a legal argument with Mark Elvinger. I've tried that in the past. It's no use. No, but all jokes apart, we all agree that climate change is the biggest threat to all of our existence, and I cannot be stern enough and serious enough to say that. And of course, it's not me, not only me who says that. It's Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, who said it already back in 2020 in his report, Call for Action for Human Rights. So let me try to add a perspective to the discussion, and a perspective through the lens of human rights. As I said, the leadership at the international level through somebody like the Secretary General Guterres is very important. And I think the minds are focused on the importance of climate action and also the very dire impact that climate change has on the situations of poverty and on human rights. And that's very important that this is recognized at the highest political levels. We also have, of course, the important documents to document these facts, going back to the Paris Agreement, Agenda 2030 with the SDGs. I mentioned Call for Action for Human Rights by Antonio Guterres, but also his report on our common agenda of 2021, in which he is listing how climate change is threatening human rights through famine, of course, through floods, through droughts, through fires and extreme heat. We have a very serious impact on human rights that are supposed to be universal and indivisible. And only to cite a few of those, there is impact on the right to life, impact on the right to drinkable water, on the right to food, on the right to the highest standards of health, and also on the right of property. Now, as a member of the Human Rights Council, Luxembourg supports all initiatives aiming at making the link between climate change and human rights more visible. How do we do that? Well, through our co-sponsorship of resolutions, for example, on the right for food and on the right to water. Sustainable development and climate action, which is based on human rights, is for us a priority for our action on the Human Rights Council. And we welcome, of course, the adoption in 2021 of the resolution on a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, and very much also the designation back then in September 2021, the designation of the Special Rapporteur on human rights and climate change. And I salute Ian Fry, of course, in that regard once again. We, from the Luxembourg delegation here in Geneva, will also sponsor in March 23, during the next Human Rights Council session, a resolution on human rights and Agenda 2030. I thought it might be useful to underline the dire impact of climate change on human rights at this moment and on this panel, in order to strengthen the case that is made for more effective adaptation and mitigation activities, including, of course, also for the indispensable financing that it takes. Compensation for loss and damage is, of course, part and parcel of these endeavors. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Mark Bischler, and I'm sure you'll find a space for legal argument with Mark Elvingard. Anyway, now I'm really very afraid we have very limited time and we can take only one or two questions. But before that, I would request Runa Khan, founder and executive director of Friendship, and she is the Ashoka Fellow and the Schwab Foundation social entrepreneur. And she founded Drawing Upon Runa a wide range of practical experiences of teaching, setting up small business, tourism, communication, and lots of things.
Yeah.
So let's listen to Runa Khan for 3-4 minutes.
So 3-4 minutes, and there is just so much of things that I have learned today from all of you, and and the fact of being in COP systematically for over the last few times and listening and understanding that Bangladesh is really putting forward this loss and damage today being such an important issue and we're speaking about that right now. Point is, what is loss and damage? Let's look at it humanely. You have a community. That community is living a simple, normal life. No floods are supposed to occur there. No land breaks are supposed to occur there. They have routes which the children go to school, and in case they need a doctor, they can take a taxi or they can take a little rickshaw and go and see a doctor. Unprecedented flood starts occurring. Unprecedented land breaks start occurring. Cyclones come, stops. Their life stops. Everything they have is taken away. Everything the child can't go to school anymore. The communities can't access legal justice, cannot access funds. They cannot continue going to a doctor. Health suffers. Demography suffers because they can't get access to population control devices. The whole system and the whole community changes. So loss and damage now, where is it that the roads are not well built, and that is why they have broken? Where is it that cyclones come to these areas? Where is the margin? How do you define? I think this definition also needs to be calculated. And I think if this is very well calculated, there would be scopes of, as Mark says, litigation. But I think these things are going to come up in any litigation which is put forward. Number two is, and Mark, you are giving us a lot of ideas, which I promise you will not follow up. Okay, no, we are not going to go into anything with the Luxembourg government. They help us a lot. So thank you. We should not do this now.
Thank you so much.
Just one moment, Amdad.
Okay.
I want to also just put in one or two more things that, loss and damage also, whatever the countries are today coming to board, it is not a question anymore of throwing the blame game. It's a question of actions. It's the question of how the money is reaching. There is a lot of money going on. The loss and damage actually incurring to be fixed so that the communities and the poor people are having safety nets is not so much money. This is the point of, it's not billions and billions. So I think the whole movement of money needs to be evaluated. Where is all this money going? Who is actually the beneficiary of this money? How much of the money is actually reaching the field so that actions are taken and people are satisfied? Because in a country, if people are getting everything, then they don't have to be scared. Then the big organization, big countries don't have to be scared of litigations coming against them because they are getting enough. So I think the whole process needs to be a bit more thought about, and the blame game needs to stop. And I think this access to really finding out and figuring out where are the parameters of what we are requesting for. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Kazi, I'm sorry to abuse, but I would, however, want to say one word. First of all, the fact that I speak of the government of Luxembourg is because I'm sitting at the desk in Luxembourg for the moment, because I'm sitting in Luxembourg, etc., etc. That's all. I mention Luxembourg for all the countries which contribute badly to climate change. That's obvious. Okay. I mean, there's nothing to be said. And I'm a lawyer in Luxembourg as well. The second element which I would like to add is on the last point which Runa just made, is that cases brought by those who are directly impacted and who suffer the loss would have the big advantage of deviating the permanent discussion about, oh, what are the countries going to do with the money? Are they going to use it in the right way, etc., etc.? So if the people who suffer the loss are those who get the compensation, that is the best manner to ensure that the money goes where it was lost.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I will now get back to my colleague Rana. Any questions in the chat box? I know we can take only one or two questions maximum. Maybe one question.
Yes, just one question. Thank you, Dr. Kazi. And I apologize for how tight the time was on the session because we started late. I know that friendship, it began its operations in 2002, pioneering the first NGO-run hospital to help the people living on CHARS. And I was moved by the video that advisor Aisha showed us. So I was wondering if friendship is organizing any initiatives to encourage more developed countries to help those people have a more dignified life. Thank you.
Okay, I think one notification we might be cut off automatically, so you were in case. Let me thanks wholeheartedly our partner for today's session, Climate Justice Center of Bangladesh, New York University Law, Friendship, LDCs Group, and all the great panelists, keynote speaker Ian Wesley, Mark Bishler, Mark Elvinger, Kirit Shelat, Barrister Aisha Tasin Khan, Professor Cesar. Truly happy being able to organize and conducting this session.